I've been lucky to have I've been I've been lucky to have experiences with a lot of really very stereotypically masculine men. Uh, and here in northern Minnesota, that might look like driving a pickup truck, wearing boots, doing construction work, hunting, having a beard, being kind of rough and strong. And a lot of those men, in my relationships with them, have been able to be exactly who they are, exactly who they want to be, and it doesn't come at anyone else's expense. Their sense of masculinity and their inhabitation of masculinity doesn't depend on anyone complying with them or deferring to them. They don't have to be dominating anyone to be as masculine as they want to be. It was a real eye-opening moment for me when that clicked in my head, because I used to have some of the same concerns. You know, what am I supposed to do? Just like shut off every masculine part of me and walk around pretending I'm someone I'm not? And I can't remember exactly who it was that helped me with it or where I was, but I just thought about these men I have known who are, anyone who knows them would say that is a very masculine man. But nothing about how they live depends on dominance, on force. They don't do anything. They can be exactly who they want to be. They can go fishing. They can go hunting. They can drive their trucks through the mud. They can, you know, and I'm intentionally drawing on some of the most stereotypical. It's like a popular country song from the U.S. They just recycle these stereotypes and these myths and these tropes about what it means to be masculine. And part of what I didn't notice until I was way older than I would prefer to have been was that a lot of those things depend on a certain relationship to either less masculine men or women, or anyone else. There's this connection between masculinity and dominance, and I am very grateful to be in a place now where I don't see that needing to be a natural connection. I think I know cisgendered heterosexual women. I know trans women who are very attracted to masculine men and don't want masculine men to downplay their masculinity. But they also have had experiences where they say, yeah, I've had relationships with men who are very masculine, and are not dominant. They don't use force. They don't expect anyone to comply with them. And it just is, I'm sort of saying the same thing over and over and over again. Masculinity does not have to come at any non-masculine person's expense. But when I think of when people ask me to define what toxic masculinity is, it is a sense of masculinity or a performance of masculinity that depends on dominance.
Yeah.
It depends on a sense of entitlement to dominance and a sense of expectation that other people will defer or be subservient or comply or be less than and smaller. And my life experiences and my work have told me that doesn't have to be.
Yeah, that's totally true, and I agree with this, that there is many times this masculinity is seen something that kind of puts many men in certain box, and you have to be in a certain way, you have to be certain type. One way of saying is this, that men don't cry, men don't show their emotions, and that's just wrong, because we're human beings, we all have our emotions, and it's healthy actually to show those. And how would you say that, how should we start engaging men to kind of go from this kind of towards the healthy masculinity, what you mentioned? We would need more and more men to open up to these issues and consider that, okay, it's not actually, and in many places it's already wrong. People don't like, in Finland we are talking about men who are hitting women. They're actually weak because they shouldn't be doing that. But blaming others is not the way, as I see it. We have to support. So what are your suggestions? How can we engage men as well, so that it's not that just feminist talk or something like this? So because you are, as an example, yourself, so what would be your suggestions?
I have been, well, so first of all, I should say that if I thought I had solutions, I would be very open in stating them. I definitely have ideas. I know what my experiences have been, but I am shoulder to shoulder with you and folks on this call and many other people who are trying to answer this question. So I think I have some valuable things to say, but I don't think they solve the problem definitively. My experience as a human being is that I was never motivated to change by someone yelling at me or telling me I was awful or trying to coerce me or convince me to do anything. I'm an unusually resistant person to change in some ways. It takes me a long time to get to a place where I change, and I especially resist someone who's telling me I'm wrong. Part of my own journey figuring out my sense of masculinity is figuring out where that resistance comes from. But what I have seen over and over again while working with men who have been arrested for using violence against women is that relationship building is the key. It's not enough to just scold somebody. It's not enough to just punish somebody and say, if you don't change, we are going to inflict pain upon you. I truly believe that anyone who is deciding to hurt another human being and doesn't stop needs to have boundaries put around them. And that's a whole longer conversation about incarceration and what those boundaries look like and what is and isn't productive. But you know, I've been in rooms full of men who, some of whom are in really deep pain about violence they have used and harm they have caused. They really want to figure it out. Sometimes they're very open about that. Sometimes they're never going to let any other man see how much pain they're in. They have a very gruff exterior. And what I have seen help men in that position start having a more expansive view of what it means to be a man is building true relationships with them, having compassion for them, being patient with them, not speaking down to them, but also not being tentative and saying the way you are behaving now is harmful to people. Would you like to find a new way of doing things? And to me, it starts there. And there was a time where if someone would have said that to me, I think my response would have been, I'm not interested in building a relationship with someone who's beaten their wife. That seems counterintuitive to me. And I'm not upset at people who respond to everything I just said with that reaction. I'm just saying that in my experience, it is possible to simultaneously be honest with someone about the harm they are causing and build a relationship with them as an equal, whole human being. And what I have seen time and time again is that that is where a process of internal change for individual men comes from. And if individual men are changing, that suggests a lot about the capacity of society to change.
Yes, I think that's important to take into consideration, that it's about human beings again. And so many times these men who are violent, they have something in their childhood or in their past that makes them, in many cases, it's a pattern that they are repeating. And in that sense, what we hear a lot is that, okay, what about those who are committing the violence? What about the perpetrators? How shouldn't you be working with them? And we understand that we cannot end violence just helping those who are suffering from violence. We also, of course, have to help those who are being the perpetrators, but we have to start from somewhere. And considering your work at Men as Peacemaker, you are using the Duluth model. Could you elaborate a bit? What is that about, and how do you work?
Sure. Yeah. So the Duluth model was created by a nonprofit agency in Duluth called the Domestic Abuse Intervention Programs. They're a very close sibling organization with Men as Peacemakers. And the Duluth model philosophy very heavily influences what we do at Men as Peacemakers and how we interact with people who have used and survived violence. And the basic premise under the Duluth model philosophy is that even in a situation where an individual human being uses violence against another individual human being, what they are doing is acting on a lot of conditioning they have received through dominant social norms, through community norms. And those individual people need to be responded to. If I'm using violence against my wife, somebody needs to take me aside and say, if you don't stop doing this, we need to separate you from her, or they need to ask her, what is it you need to feel safe, from Chris. And most responses I've heard from people who have survived violence are, I don't want anyone to inflict pain on him. I just want him to stop hurting me. That's all I want. And the folks in the Duluth model listened to survivors who were saying that and said to themselves, this is not a problem that is limited to pairs of individuals. This is a community problem. And if it's a community problem, it falls on the community to help solve the problem. There are some really valid ways of critiquing the way the Duluth model was first implemented. One of the reasons it gained the title the Duluth model was that Duluth was the first city in which mandatory arrests were implemented for police calls to homes where domestic violence was happening. It was a very well-intentioned policy that folks, especially from marginalized communities, have named as being damaging to their communities. That's having someone arrested doesn't always make the problem go away or create more safety. Right? There are really vigorous debates about this happening, but the main premise is domestic violence is not a problem that is based in individual pathology among individual violence users. Chemical dependency, mental illness, unresolved trauma, all those things can play a role in a person's decision-making process, but it's not the reason. Those things get influenced by and sometimes heightened by larger cultural messages that tell us masculinity should be taken more seriously than femininity. Men should have control in relationships over women. So it's a combination of community cultural norms and individual characteristics. And what we are attempting to do is work with individual people in a way that accounts for the culture we're all influenced by.
Yes, and that's very, very important, because I truly believe that there isn't one way just to punish people and think that, okay, that solves the problem. We have to help and work with them. Similarly, with the victims, we have to give them support and understanding that you should seek for help, you should talk about the issue. And similarly, those who are committing violence act, they should do something about it. And I really like with the Duluth model this community aspect, that you should kind of involve everyone in this. And as we are having the limited time today for this, I would like to ask now if anyone from those who are listening to us, if they have at the moment, if they have any questions that they would like to bring up, or give comments or anything, so you can type on the chat, and we will try and make best to answer those questions. And one thing that came to my mind that is kind of considering the committing the crime and police coming there, and then they should prosecute and take the violence acts forward. What I was hearing from the Improdova, which is an EU-wide project, and Bettina Fleider is part of that community. What I heard from one of their webinars is that in EU we have the problem that in too many times the court cases are just looking at the individual crime that has been committed, and they don't see the violence that might be going on for years and years. So in that sense, intimate partner violence should be kind of seen from different angle, from the victim's perspective. So it might be that she has been under control for 10 years, and then there is only one violent act that the court is actually taking into consideration. What are your thoughts on that?
It's very encouraging to me that both here in the States and in the UK and in European, seems as if in many European countries that the concept of coercive control is becoming a much more prominent aspect of the conversation about domestic violence. Every violence user I have spoken with extensively, every survivor I have spoken with, they will acknowledge that individual acts of physical violence are very impactful. They don't downplay that at all. But they also, survivors especially, want to say there are people who don't know that he hit me once 10 years ago. He was recently arrested for hitting me, and during that time, I was never safe.
Yeah.
He wasn't using physical violence against me. There were no marks on me. And it was very difficult to explain to anyone that I was in danger, because when I would explain to them what he was doing and how it was affecting me, it was very easy for them to dismiss. So the fact that those voices are being listened to, the voices of people who have endured those forms of violence, I've heard them called more softer forms of violence or more subtle forms of violence, and I think that's unfortunate. Because what I have experienced from people who have used those forms of violence is that if they are not using physical violence, they don't feel like they're violent at all.
Yeah.
So the fact that coercive control and the tactics of coercive control are becoming a much more prominent part of public conversation about domestic violence is, I say it's encouraging to me. I wish we didn't have to talk about it at all. I wish it didn't exist. But if it exists, I am happy that we are naming it more accurately and more directly than we have in the past.
Yeah, I agree. And we have a comment here from Anje Joel. Sorry for pronouncing the name in a Finnish way. It says that I find that there are often similar mechanisms of stigmatization and exclusion at play regarding victims and perpetrators. Both are being seen as treated as others or outsiders, which effectively amplifies the problem. And that's a good comment. And considering the conversations that we have had with the survivors of violence, they all state that the physical violence wasn't the worst. It was the mental violence and the continuous control and downplaying and so on. Bettina, you would like to say something? Please go ahead.
Yes, yes. First of all, Chris, thanks a lot for really, I think, for your great definitions and sharing your insight. You know, I'm a representative of this research project, you know, from the European Union, and the goal is basically to tackle severe domestic violence for various frontline responder groups: the police, the social sector, and the medical sector. And our goal is basically to foster and facilitate interagency cooperation. And, you know, and what we learned when we talked to people in various frontline responder groups, and we did quite a few of these interviews, that it's so hard, as you said, to sort of tackle these coercive control and psychological violence, because you see the medical field, for instance, it's very, you know, if someone comes and is battered and has some certain, you know, injuries, and it's more easy to intervene. But when you learn about these coercive control things, is often when you're a psychotherapist or being a psychiatrist or a counselor, and somebody comes with total different, you know, symptoms, say having back pains or can't sleep at night, or you know,
Bettina, I think we lost you. So if we heard correctly what Bettina was stating, she was telling how many times those who are suffering from violence, they are coming from completely with different types of symptoms to doctor and so on. And my apologies, we will be kicked out in less than a minute for again for this talk. So I hope you have had a good time. I think Chris is always a lovely to talk to, because you have such a long understanding and the models that you use and so on. So feel free to share your last thoughts, and feel free to also reach out to us if you have anything to ask more. And also for Chris, I think you are also available. So in the chat, you can find Chris's. Yes, Stephanie is giving a good comment here about the victim blaming. And that's usually a very big problem, that there is so many times there are people asking that, okay, why aren't you just leaving? And that's true. Yes, this is very true. And also the self-defense is many times something that the women is kind of, you get persecuted if you defend yourself, and there is a lot of trouble with this. And there's also one comment, the community involvement is vital, and it's very important. So this is exactly that, we shouldn't keep the perpetrators also in a bubble. So that's very true.